Kindergarten is a good game, and it's been around for a while. Starting in 2017, nearly 8 years ago, the game was a hit back in the day as a replayable, fun game with dark humor. In the game, you would play as a kid going to a rather odd kindergarten in which violence is commonplace, the kids definitely don't act like kindergartners, and a kid named Billy apparently went missing while nobody seems to care. In the game, we are in a time loop repeating the same day over and over again to complete different routes, helping certain people to try and figure out what really is going on with this school, which turns out to be mutant experiments, something which continues to be a theme in Kindergarten 2 and the recently released Kindergarten 3. However, something we never really learn about is what's with the time loop, and this is something I haven't really thought about up until when I was rewatching Cub Scouts playthroughs of Kindergarten 2 again, and realized...
What do you think? I thought we were together. I thought you were my love. Sorry, honey, but we're yesterday's news. Besides...
Wait... How could we have been Cindy's boyfriend yesterday if we are following after Lily's route from yesterday? It's natural to reference a previous game, given of course if you make a sequel you're going to reference back to the original, but the problem comes with the fact they're remembering events that couldn't have happened. Cindy's route of constant marital abuse and us becoming their boyfriend at all requires us to irreversibly ruin our relations with Lily, which we need for the route. We cannot both be her boyfriend and help Lily in the same ending, especially given that at the end of Cindy's route, Lily dies. Are the characters not from the same loop? That is what I would like to show today, as I've analyzed each of the routes of all 3 games to figure out which routes and timelines the characters had to have come from for their references to make sense, as well as discovering some odd paradoxes, some really interesting hidden stories that come from this, and most importantly, learn a bit about how the time loop works in Kindergarten. Warm those nuggets, my friend, because we're going to start with probably the most simple of the 3 games, that being Kindergarten 1. Starting here, this game I found to be the simplest in regards to how many characters come from different timelines, due to most characters not bringing up route-specific past events. However, we also do still have events that couldn't have happened at the same time. So let's go ahead and start with Cindy, seeing as they're a pretty easy example of this. As stated previously, we can't be Cindy's girlfriend unless we are doing her route, plain and simple. But there's also a few other problems. See, Cindy doesn't like failure. There are several where she becomes extremely angry at us for failing. Namely, if we tell Lily about the gum, if we fail to get into the janitor's closet after she steals the key and pays off the lunch lady, and if we either fail to find something gross or don't dump it on Lily's head. Hey, late night editing me here. Today I learned at some point between when the Let's Players played it years back versus now, there were a lot of changes. Most noteworthy example of a change being how originally Cindy makes a reference to abortion, and it has since been changed to adoption, despite that making the whole pill scene not make any more sense. Or in my case for recording this, in the past I swear there was a scene where if you spend all of your apples here instead of dumping the bucket, Cindy would get pissed at you. But now it just doesn't let you. Like, I'm spamming the past time button here, like in the footage, and it just doesn't do anything anymore. It also looks like the lunch bell now cuts off the failing the vegan quest thing, where I swear she would say something along the lines of, "You're a good boy, but it looks like this is it for us," and then would make a comment about her mother again. But my point still roughly stands to what I say in a second here, so I just want to point that out. In Kindergarten 3, however, she doesn't hold anything specific against us. It seems to be a neutral we weren't good enough feeling rather than hatred, meaning we know we couldn't have failed any of these tasks, but we also know we couldn't have succeeded as Lily dies at the very end of the route. Even though Lily is underground for most of Kindergarten 2, she would have said something during the ending where we used her to kill Miss Applegate, because she would have seen her here. Using context clues, however, I think it's safe to say that this version of Cindy must have come from an aborted route in which we failed at the vegan quest, where she demands that we find her something vegan, as when we fail that, she doesn't hold nearly as much contempt for us and acts rather similar to how she does in Kindergarten 2, also ensuring that Lily lives for her to not question why she's alive later, and for us to have already played house with her in the past to then reference it later. Other than Cindy, most other characters make it clear that they have to be from Lily's mission. Lily, Billy, and the principal are obviously from this timeline, as if Billy is saved and the principal is dead. The only interesting one being Monty. Now, Monty in Kindergarten 2 is in a wheelchair because of this event you can do 2 in Kindergarten 1. Now your player can't read because you are playing as a 5-year-old, but Monty can, seeing he's the token smart kid. So if you talk to him, he'll mention that the janitor spelled biscuit wrong on their biscuit ball stand, and if you let the janitor know that, then the janitor will bludgeon him to death for correcting his spelling. This can technically happen in any ending due to the fact that it's just a random general event from talking to both Monty and the janitor at lunch. However, we also have another clue that can help us hone in on something more specific. In Kindergarten 2, whenever we need Monty to read something, such as for Carla or Felix's mission, he says that we know they can read, and also know that's going to cost us, meaning we likely use Monty to read something prior to their beating. Now, most of the missions we need Monty to read in don't let us tell the janitor about Monty correcting his spelling because we have a limited supply of apples during lunch. You only have so many actions you can take before you run out. But there's one mission where we have an extra apple, Lily's, which right at the start of the mission, we use Monty to read a note which he finishes deciphering at the beginning of lunch. And needing to leave to get the principal's lounge after this, we do need a distraction. So in this timeline, we used Monty getting pummeled as the distraction. Unfortunately, these are all we can confirm about Kindergarten 1, as the unconfirmed timeline here is the largest. There's still a few things of note to mention here. For example, Nugget cannot come from a timeline where we've been friends. As in Kindergarten 2, he doesn't trust us even when we free him with the janitor's tool belt. Not unless we free him ourselves and give a reason to now become friends. This means Nugget doesn't recognize or trust us. Jerome, although seems like they're from Lily and Billy's timeline, they're only stated to have found out their dad died the next day, which is when they would have been transferred into our timeline like Cindy has. So it's plausible that Jerome could be from pretty much any route, friends or not, as his dialogue doesn't push one way or the other. Miss Applegate, Bugs, the hall monitor, and the janitor have no direct references that throw us towards any set ending in the game, making them all unaccounted for, as well as being from just any ending that they don't directly die in. Kindergarten 2 is where we get interesting. But to get the most uninteresting one out of the way though, we know that Lily, Billy, the female principal, and Alice are all from the Creature Feature timeline. As Alice appears in Kindergarten 2, the principal is dead, and Lily, Billy, and Nugget seem to recount the events of that ending. On a more interesting note though, we know that A Tale of Two Janitors has Stevie and the janitor, but it's not as basic as you'd think. We know this has to be canon as Stevie retains the bludgeoning from this ending, but there is a bit of a problem. We know Bob is alive in Kindergarten 3, but in this ending Bob is cut up by a chainsaw, and Stevie is implied to be too, as they are both dumped in trash bags and then thrown away. At the end of this ending, the dumpster woman agrees to protect the bodies so they aren't found by police, so we know that Stevie couldn't have escaped or lived. However, that doesn't mean that he's immediately dead the moment he's bloodied. Now we know for certain that we could not have gotten that far in the mission before he noped out, and given Monty still seemed to be fine with us in Kindergartens 2 and 3, we know that this must have been right after Stevie got mauled when we were supposed to get the elevator key, to which we got cold feet and didn't. As if we do get the elevator key, we can't return to Monty, making him unable to leave the upper layer, but also the janitor couldn't access the chainsaw or trash bags, meaning he'd just have to leave Stevie, who could then technically have a chance to crawl away and live to see Kindergarten 3. Though there's a very minor paradox here too, as in Kindergarten 3, Stevie mentions getting addicted to cigarettes by the other hall monitor. This only happens in the bathroom in Creature Feature, so unless the hall monitor snuck him cigarettes in the operating room, I think these two things couldn't have both happened at the same time. Hey, post me again. Quick additional thing I found while editing the later half of this video. I didn't explain a whole lot of why I think the janitor is remembering this ending in particular, most of which is mainly because he references beating up Stevie in Cold-Blooded Killer, and so that makes it kind of obvious, and there wasn't a whole lot else. But more interestingly, I don't know how I missed this earlier, I found that later in the Cold-Blooded Killer route, there's a line of dialogue where we poke fun at how he needed an elevator key to get up the stairs yesterday, and yet now he's climbing a ladder just fine, to which he mocks us, showing that he remembers this. It took me until just now to realize that if he referenced the elevator key here, then while Stevie is from an aborted route from before getting the elevator key, the janitor has to be from a completed version of the route, which would also make sense as to why he's so surprised that Stevie's surviving and offers him a beer. I say completed for janitor just because after getting the elevator key, if you waste your apples at any point, he will kill you right before you leave school. Prior to this, you're fine if you don't complete it, but after this point, you just die. That's it. And seeing the Bob scene doesn't happen anywhere near the janitor, he wouldn't need to do a double take. So for the janitor, we had to have successfully killed Bob and dumped Stevie. But for Stevie, it was during a round in which we didn't complete the elevator key, and he lived, and we also lived. So yeah, just want to point that out. Yeah. Flowers for Diana is quite a doozy. Let's start with the easier one, Bob and Cindy. We know that they're from this mission because both of them reference it later. Bob being on a phone call with Miss Applegate, where they reference their makeout session, and Cindy referencing being hooked up with Felix. Applegate you'd think would be the same as Bob, as again, they're both on a call during helicopter parenting, and clearly remember each other, even mentioning how they're worried they wouldn't meet again after what happened yesterday. But then I got to the mission Breaking Sad. In the mission, we get Applegate to have withdrawals over pills by giving her a mental breakdown, in which we help Monty reset up his supply chain and get back to making the principal's old pills. However, in Kindergarten 3, she doesn't mention much about the pills until we get back to helicopter parenting, in which she mentions Monty's recipe from yesterday. My immediate thought was maybe both of these Applegates were from different timelines, and it varies depending on the mission. Then I realized that both these lines of dialogue are from the same mission. Miss Applegate remembers both the events of Flowers for Diana and Breaking Sad. It's a paradox. Both of these things can't be true. There's also something very interesting about Felix and Ted. Now, Ted in Kindergarten 2 was pretty naive and trusting of Felix to the point they were willing to assassinate their classmate Ozzy without knowing fully why Felix wanted them dead, and didn't suspect anything, and Kane's not able unless we outright show them the contract, to which they don't believe you initially, until they realize it's the same handwriting. But in Kindergarten 3, they suddenly shift to plotting against Felix, switching their clothes to keep himself in the smart school and force Felix into the school he hates. This wouldn't make sense unless Ted learned something in that time, but more interestingly, Felix seems taken aback by this sudden change in behavior. Even their father Huxley mentions this. The only way that Ted could have this sudden shift is if he came from the alternate ending of Kane's Not Able, where they turn the tables on Felix on the last second. But the problem you may be thinking is, don't they get pushed in the pit and die? How would Ted not question Felix being alive again the next day? Well, there is the chance that's an aborted route in which Ted learns of the assassination but the plan is never finished, leaving him aware but still pretending not to know. After all, if they change clothes, then if Felix tried to hire another hitman, he'd be the target again, flipping it just like in the mission. Alternatively, there's also a pretty big change between the two endings. In Felix's route, we get the spiders from the shelf in Dr. Danner's, a man who is known for biologically engineered things and not caring for safety standards. Knowing him, they're probably deadly, meaning Ted would be dead in his route. But in Ted's version of the route, we don't get Danner's spiders, we instead collect some generic spiders from the bathroom. Spiders which are likely basic house spiders, not venomous. There's also the fact that in Felix's route, Felix has Ted buried alive by Nugget. But in Ted's version, Nugget learns there is no Nugget factory, the thing that Felix was using to make Nugget help, and so rather than filling it in, Nugget jumps in to attack Felix and wrangle them in the hole. Both of those changes kind of make it possible for him to have survived and for Ted to not question him being alive the next day. In his mind, he has always seen Felix as a superior brother after having it hammered into his head for so long. So using different spiders, not getting buried alive, and Ted's own perception of Felix, it's natural that you wouldn't question him turning up again and would want to keep fighting him. As for Felix though, Felix again was very caught off guard by Ted's change in behavior, meaning he definitely wasn't from either version of Kane's Not Able. But given how willing Felix is to talk with us and trust us with his plan to get back, that signifies him trusting in our work in the past, which originally made me think that he was from the mission Hitman's bodyguard. Seeing that shows us as willing to blindly follow whatever we think the twins want. However, they are actually from Flowers for Diana because of one key interaction where we know Cindy and Felix had to have dated yesterday. This felt weird at first until I remembered that throughout Flowers for Diana, we do several tasks for the two, like matchmaking them by delivering a love letter, helping Felix find something vegan, and harming one of the other girls for Cindy's ego, getting us the flower for that mission. As such, Felix has seen us work with him in a good way, to which it would make sense why he would trust us in helping him escape the school in Kindergarten 3. Monty is also pretty interesting. We know he got his parts from Penny in Kindergarten 3, but remember that Penny died in the lab you can only access by scanning Penny's eye, which is still in the lab. Even with the elevator key, you can't access these lower levels, even though Monty says that they went down to the lab. But upon looking a bit closer, I'm pretty sure we're just misunderstanding the wording here. Take a look at the order he says it. After you guys killed Penny, I went down to the secret lab and found all sorts of crazy robot parts. Given he couldn't have gone down to the lab without having access to Penny's head, or at the very least knowing that she's a robot, he can't be from the creature feature timeline like he's implying here. But if you still think he was from that timeline, how would he know that we killed Penny? There's a giant monster right there, and what about Billy or Lily? But if we go to the Opposites Attract mission, we know first of all that Monty is aware that she is a robot, as he's the first one to read the document that tells us this and how she works. Plus, in this ending, after we kill Penny with a magnet, the science teacher promptly rockets out of there, to which everyone leaves. But this also means that Monty has unrestricted access to Penny's body. He could have taken Penny's legs here, deactivate the magnet, and used her head to get down to the labs and learn how to rewire it to himself. Especially given that from the paper we pay him to read, he already knows it works and is compatible with amputees because Penny herself is an android and still has some human parts to her. It makes sense that after hearing the news about this school's lab, they would head down there real quick to figure things out. His quote isn't referring to you guys as in you, Billy and Lily, he's referring to you, Bugs and Carla. After you guys killed Penny, I went down to the secret lab and found all sorts of crazy robot parts. As for unconfirmed timelines, Bugs and Jerome don't appear in Kindergarten 3, so we don't have much to go off of there. And the dumpster woman does appear, but the only thing we have to go off of is that they have to be from a timeline where we needed her and talked to her before. Though this can happen pretty much in any playthrough where we're not in study hall, so. As for Kindergarten 3, although we don't have a Kindergarten 4 to compare it to, we do still have a few things we know. Through context clues, as Kindergarten 4 will likely take place immediately after this falling scene, just from this scene alone, we can tell that the ending is Cold-Blooded Killer, Garden of Emmy, The Show Must Go On, The Great Escape, Gatorade, and Helicopter Parenting cannot be canon unless they are aborted routes due to the characters being different, injured, or dead, which other characters would immediately be able to question and point out. However, what we can say is that What Happened on Monday and Nugget and Liliet are both plausible for versions of the characters, and of course, Paging Dr. Goolittle is the definite main timeline, unless Chapter 4 is not in a hole. Now that's all in regards to the individual game, but before I go, I just wanted to go over some additional oddities I found while doing all of this in regards to the timeline. In Things That Go Boom, Nugget makes a reference to usually trying to poison their enemies during the food fight scene, which would mean that Nugget either has poisoned people prior to Kindergarten 1, or that Nugget comes from a timeline specifically where we are poisoned and then cured, or a timeline where Bugs is poisoned. Though this is difficult given the fact that he also can't be our friend in order for Kindergarten 2's dialogue to make sense. In Kane's Not Able, Bob seems to be confused as to why the axe has blood on it in the janitor's closet, and mentions not knowing what happened yesterday. This is implied to be the axe he fights with during the final ending, but we need to complete this route in order to get an item needed for Breaking Sad, which is needed for Creature Feature for him to use the axe. We have to have seen Bob be confused by here first before we can have Bob actually have done this to then remember doing it in the past. How does Bob even slightly remember something that hasn't even happened in our time loop? Unless somebody else might have had the time loop powers before us. Okay, I swear this is the last time I'm popping in. Post me again. I also just noticed that when entering the closet for Creature Feature, the axe becomes bloody on both sides and chipped before Bob can even get his hands on it shortly thereafter. Meaning not only had it had to have been used once before for the initial axe, but then it also had to be used a second time and then a third time for Creature Feature. What is happening to the timeline? In What Happened on Monday, we see Regis press in a code on the floor before the child player has fallen all the way. When we arrive, we are told that we need to type in the code in the reverse order by the old principal, despite us having no way of knowing that code, as he doesn't even tell us the code that was just entered so we could. Does he just assume that we saw? Those aren't transparent tubes. Is he aware of the fourth wall player in some way? Also, there's a pretty big paradox in Creature Feature where in Kindergarten 2, Lily, Billy, Cindy, you, and Bugs all kill Miss Applegate. Although Bugs didn't see Applegate in Kindergarten 3 due to not being there, why doesn't Lily question how Applegate is alive again during Kindergarten 3's Nuggeto and Liliet quest? She sees her there at lunch when she's being made to fake her own death, as Applegate is the lunch lady right there, and she makes no reference to how she's back after being stabbed to death. Speaking of Nuggeto and Liliet, when Lily says they aren't going to stab themselves, Nugget becomes upset at the idea of study hall, even though this is grossly out of character given Nugget's in love with Lily and wouldn't want them in danger, having risked himself to save her in the past. Taking the elevator down to the underrooms, we meet Billy and Lily and try to get get hair samples from them only for them to refuse, them mentioning thinking that they could trust us because we had the secret plush, though not because we saved them in kindergarten 1. Do they not remember that? Speaking of, Lily seems oddly hesitant with us in kindergarten 3, and only becomes willing to let us in on the plan if Nugget is there, despite us having been the main catalyst in the 2 other endings. Nugget wasn't even really involved in the rescue in kindergarten 1, other than the note. Anyways, originally I was going to then go on about a mini theory I had in regards to Nugget's oddities. However, as I was writing it, it wound up being an entire 6 additional pages, but it might just answer some of those other oddities about Lily, about the 4th wall, and about Nugget's very being. So I've decided I'm going to make this video a 2-parter in which you're gonna have to come back next Friday for a theory all about Nugget. As other than that, I'm afraid that's all I have for you. Subscribe so you won't miss the 2nd part, and I will see you randy dandy folks next time. Bye!